She dropped the stack of divorce papers onto the kitchen island like she was slamming down a royal flush in a poker game. Still in her pajamas, still barefoot, and grinning like the damn Joker. "Half of everything you built will be mine," she said, cocking her head like this was some rom-com moment and not the dismemberment of a 15-year marriage. Her voice was sweet, soaked in the kind of fake empathy people use before they push you off a cliff. "You can make this easy or hard, but it's happening." I didn't say a word. I didn't flinch, just stared at her for a beat, then picked up my coffee mug and walked right past her like she was a mannequin in a storefront I didn't care to enter. She called after me. "You could at least pretend you're surprised." I paused, hand on the doorknob, gave her a sideways look. "Are you done with the toner in the printer? I need to refill it for work." That was all I gave her. "Because you don't yell at storms. You outlast them." She moved out that weekend. Said she needed space to rediscover herself. What that meant, apparently, was rediscovering the guy who used to sell weed out of his dorm back in '03 and now wore designer belts, and called himself a wellness real estate strategist. If that sounds fake, that's because it is. He builds overpriced retreat properties for divorcees and yoga YouTubers, usually by borrowing capital from partners, then ghosting when permits fall through. She was already bragging to her friends about how driven he was, and how I was boring, predictable, emotionally unavailable. The whole catalog of phrases women learn from relationship podcasts hosted by people with blue checks and 3 divorces. I knew about him before she even said his name. It wasn't the perfume or the late gym sessions. It was her coffee mug. She used to drink out of a plain, chipped one I gave her when we moved into our first place. Suddenly, she had a new one, green ceramic, hand-glazed, with a stupid Little Mountain logo on it. The logo matched a photo I saw once on a retreat center brochure on her laptop. Not in her files. No, that would be obvious. It was a cached image in the browser suggestions when I went to type in maps. So I did what any man with a brain and a mortgage would do. I shut up. I listened. I paid attention. She was sloppy in her glee. "I guess people are when they think they've already won." She laughed loudly on calls. Left receipts in the recycling bin from expensive lunches. One even had a hand-drawn heart on the back with the initials S+M inside. I almost respected the stupidity of it. Like watching a raccoon try to open a bank vault. She filed the divorce under irreconcilable differences, which is modern legalese for "I'm too proud to say I got bored and someone else promised me Instagram vacations and better sex." I didn't contest it. I signed where I had to, smiled during mediation, gave just enough to look compliant. She told her friends I was resigned. No, I was documenting. We didn't have kids, which made things easier on paper. But I had spent the last decade and a half building a software licensing company from a folding table in our basement to a nationwide platform for logistics automation. My name wasn't just on the patents. It was buried in the code, in the filing structure, in the damn help desk scripts I wrote myself when we couldn't afford support staff. She thought she could carve half out of it like a cake. What she didn't realize was that the cake had multiple layers. Hidden ones, written into our operating agreement, the ownership clauses, the distribution trees. Legal jargon she never cared to read when she was too busy painting the living room walls sage green for the energy. "You'll be left with crumbs," she once said over speakerphone while chatting with her sister. He's still stuck in the old model. Sean's building something spiritual. Ah, yes. The spiritual side of laundering investor money through shell LLCs in counties with no zoning board. What no one seemed to notice was how I stopped pushing back. I started working later. Quietly transitioned back-end operations. Reassigned my equity rights under a licensing clause she didn't understand. Gave my business partner power of attorney over very specific corporate actions, one of which included freezing all transfers during active divorce proceedings unless approved by both founders. And she didn't notice the clauses I'd added to the corporate charter 2 years prior when we restructured for tax efficiency, because she never read them. She was too busy taking selfies at juice bars. By the time she served me, I already had all the necessary signatures lined up, but I didn't use them. Not yet, because this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about him. Sean, the man who had supposedly saved her. He was on a different trajectory altogether. And what she didn't realize, what she couldn't realize, was that his trajectory was about to intersect with mine. Not through love, not through jealousy, through law. Because Sean wasn't just her rebound. He was also the respondent in a high-profile custody case 2 states away, involving a woman who still carried his last name, 2 kids under the age of 10, and a very specific sealed complaint buried under a court protection order. I knew because I requested the docket through a friend. Not a lawyer. Smarter than a lawyer. A man who'd once written the model code for multi-state custody enforcement procedures. The kind of man who didn't ask why I needed it, just asked where to send it. That's when I saw the opportunity. Not to fight her, but to make her irrelevant. Because when you touch the wrong domino, you don't just lose your hand. You collapse the entire game. And she had no idea how close she was to the edge. I didn't start with lawyers. Lawyers are hammers. They hit whatever's placed in front of them, loud and expensive. I needed a scalpel. Someone who understood the structure of precedent. Not just how to argue a point, but how to quietly stitch threads together until a pattern appeared. So I called Owen. We hadn't spoken in 3 years. Not since his wife passed and he retired from publishing those dense legal commentary digests only corporate compliance officers and masochists read in full. He was one of those guys who made judges nervous without ever stepping foot in a courtroom. Because when Owen annotated a case, it meant someone's reputation was about to be autopsied in slow motion. I didn't even need to explain much. Just told him her new boyfriend's name, the jurisdiction, and the general time frame of the custody hearing. He grunted. That trash fire? Yeah, I remember. Thought the court sealed most of it. I waited. Sipped my coffee. He continued. You're going to want the secondary filings. Motion 23D. That's where it gets interesting. Also, pull the 19C clause for intersecting family law issues tied to third-party financial sponsors. Buried in Title V. No one ever reads Title V. That's the kind of friend Owen is. A week later, a manila envelope arrived at my office. No return address. No digital trail. Inside, a printed copy of the court's private bench notes from the custody case, highlighted by Owen in red pencil like a bored professor correcting a half-hearted essay. On the final page, stapled to the back, was a single page marked, sealed ethics complaint, Judicial Review Board. No details, just the confirmation of its existence, the date of filing, and the respondent, Sean Ashcroft, my wife's spiritual realtor boyfriend. Apparently, he'd perjured himself in court testimony regarding his income, claimed he had no active equity in any business, when in fact he held controlling interest in 3, 2 of which had pending litigation over investor fraud. The court had sealed the ethics complaint to protect ongoing investigations tied to family proceedings, but there it was. A breadcrumb. Enough to follow. I didn't need the juicy parts. I just needed the clause that made it admissible. And that's where 19C came in. Under Title V, Section 19C of the Uniform Family Intersections Act, an obscure piece of cross-state legal glue nobody talks about unless they're being sued. Any third party financially intertwined with a custody respondent, if that third party is also legally entangled with someone else undergoing active asset division, can be named as a relevant intersecting interest. In plain English, if my wife was funneling money to Sean, and Sean was using it to argue for custody of a child that wasn't hers, and I could prove that money originally came from our joint marital estate, then I wasn't just a bitter husband. I was a witness. That meant I had standing, not to intervene, not to testify, but to submit a sealed affidavit, corroborated by financial evidence, within the jurisdiction of the custody court as a material party of interest under 19C. But none of that would matter if I couldn't prove the flow of money. So I dug. She hadn't been careful. She used our joint credit card for a wellness weekend in upstate New York, a weekend that just so happened to coincide with the launch of a new eco-retreat partnership Sean was promoting. She Venmo'd him small amounts with emoji captions like seedling sweat droplets and our dream, which, as far as financial codes go, might as well have said co-conspirator funds, see Schedule A. She'd even transferred $12,000 from our savings account to a new LLC, her name on the wire, but his name on the articles of incorporation. Sloppy doesn't begin to cover it. And I didn't stop there. I contacted a freelance CPA I used for contract work. Told him I needed forensic analysis on 6 months of banking data, cross-referenced with any 1,099 MISC or Schedule C filings tied to entities registered to the Ashcroft umbrella. He raised an eyebrow. He owed me a favor. 2 days later, he sent over a spreadsheet titled Contaminated Streams. That's what he called it. A map of every transaction connecting her accounts to his. And more importantly, how my income had funded those accounts. Retirement withdrawals, stock liquidation, deferred comp I'd signed off on in good faith before she blindsided me with the divorce. It wasn't about the money. It was about the leverage. The court didn't care that he was a fraud. They cared that he lied under oath, that he concealed assets, that he manipulated financial ties to create a false image of stability. And now, with my affidavit, the judge would have the context. But I didn't rush it. Timing mattered. Too early, and it would look retaliatory. Too late, and the hearing would be over. I had to wait for her to walk into the lion's den on her own. So I played the idiot. Took her calls when she needed access to the house. Let her gloat. Let her assume I was too wounded to act. Meanwhile, I worked late, not because I had extra tasks, but because I was running simulations. Financial timelines. Asset trails. Communications clean enough to be submitted in court, but damning enough to hint at conspiracy. I even made sure to change nothing about my demeanor. Still brought her mail inside. Still paid the water bill. Still mowed the lawn on Saturdays like nothing had changed. Because the thing about traps is, they don't look like traps. They look like patterns. Habits. Comfort. I wasn't building a case against her. I was constructing a corridor. One she'd walk down, hand in hand with her boyfriend, thinking they were untouchable. And when the doors locked behind her, when the lights flicked on and the judge raised his head, it wouldn't be my voice she heard. It would be the law's. And it would say, "You've been expected." The story should have ended with her. But it didn't. It was supposed to be a straightforward humiliation, expose her arrogance, dismantle the financial shell game, then walk away while she scrambled to explain herself. But the more I read through those court records, the more I realized she wasn't the only one running a con. She was just the latest accessory to a man who had made destruction into an art form. Sean Ashcroft wasn't just a fraud. He was a professional at it. A serial manipulator who treated legal systems the way gamblers treat blackjack tables, stacked with tricks, smirks, and sleight-of-hand filings. I thought my wife was reckless for using our joint savings to fund his little side ventures. But it turns out she was lucky. Compared to the women before her, she got off easy, at least so far. One of those women was his ex-wife, a woman whose name was buried in a redacted line item in the motion filings. A woman who hadn't just sued him for custody. She'd brought the entire weight of a judicial ethics board to the table and won. Her name was Marissa Eltman, formerly Marissa Ashcroft, and she hadn't just fought for custody. She dragged him through a brutal 4-year battle that ended with him losing all parental rights, not just visitation, not just weekends. Gone. Terminated. The court found systematic emotional instability, willful financial deceit, and repeated instances of intentional perjury. That language doesn't show up in custody rulings unless someone nearly burned the courthouse down on their way out. How she got the ruling? That's where things got interesting. Marissa had a brother-in-law. He just happened to sit on the Circuit Judicial Assignment Board. He didn't hand her the verdict, but he made sure the judge on the case wasn't some green rookie looking to play it safe. The judge assigned was Harold Minters, a man known for two things: absolute disgust for dishonesty and an encyclopedic memory for sealed cases. Guess which judge was presiding over Sean's next custody modification hearing? Minters. Same courthouse. Same judge. Same man who had already ruled once against Sean. And now Sean was crawling back, trying to show he was reformed. His lawyer's motion claimed demonstrated stability through new, long-term domestic partnership and a successful return to entrepreneurial responsibility. I read that line twice. Then again. Then leaned back in my chair and let out the closest thing to a laugh I'd had in 6 months. Because that new, long-term domestic partnership was my wife. My money. My home. My name on every financial statement that made Sean look stable. I was the papier-mâché holding together his collapsing statue of self-reinvention. And Marissa? She was fighting it. I had the hearing date. It was marked as Modification Review with Third-Party Financial Update. I called Owen again. He picked up without saying hello. Just muttered, "You're in deeper now, aren't you? I need access to the motion archive. Everything from the 2021 financial disclosures and the corresponding objections. You want the amendment file?" "Exactly." He sighed. "I'll send you a clean copy. But you owe me a bottle of Lafroig and an explanation someday." "Deal." The amendment file changed everything. Because it wasn't just about Sean lying. It was about how he kept lying. Even after losing custody, he had filed multiple motions under multiple business entities, each one claiming different income streams, asset bases, and living arrangements. One LLC claimed he lived in Colorado. Another listed him as a contractor based out of Phoenix. Meanwhile, his actual tax return, what little of it was visible, had listed him as temporarily unemployed for 2 years running. The man was a legal chameleon. But now, he'd tethered himself to someone real. Me. And that gave Marissa something she'd never had before, a financial anchor. Every check he deposited, every rent payment made through an account tied to me, every business expense billed through his shell companies while living under my wife's name, It was all traceable now. Not to me directly, but enough to show inconsistency, enough to raise flags, and enough for a judge with a long memory to reopen sealed questions. The trick was making sure that Marissa's team knew what to look for, without it being traceable back to me. So I used a trick I learned years ago from a former client, a guy who ran cyber compliance for a private defense contractor. When they wanted to leak something without a trail, they used burner metadata tags embedded in shared PDFs uploaded to old academic repository forums. Seemed archaic, but it worked. I posted a clean version of the financial chart I'd built. It looked like a student paper on cross-jurisdictional LLC structures. But the source tags in the document, timestamps, oblique references, breadcrumb trails, were unmistakable to the right eye. Marissa's legal team found it within 3 days. They submitted a supplemental brief to the court before the hearing, arguing that the respondent had materially misrepresented financial dependencies through third-party cohabitation and concealed fiscal overlaps. And because of that, the court added one more item to the docket, a third-party financial interest inquiry. Guess who got listed? My wife. Not by name, initially, just domestic partner of record. But when the court pulled the property tax records, my property, her name showed up. When they pulled the wire transfer logs, her bank account. When they pulled the LLC paperwork, her digital signature, attaching her as communications officer for Sean's boutique project in Vermont. She'd let him talk her into being an executive on paper, to look legit. And now, it was going to cost her, because she wasn't just a side character anymore. She was a supporting witness, a supporting financial witness, which meant she could be subpoenaed, questioned, named, and best of all, she had no clue. She thought she'd show up to his hearing to support him, maybe post a cute Instagram story of them outside the courthouse, #newbeginnings, or some crap like that. She thought the judge would see a loving couple, a success story. What he'd see instead, a familiar face tied to a new lie, and me, sitting quietly in the back row, watching the dominoes line up. The thing about revenge that actually works, the kind that doesn't just humiliate, but erases, is that it can't be rushed. Not with emotion, not with pride, and definitely not with an email chain labeled exposing the truth, like some digital tantrum. This had to be surgical, because if the evidence wasn't admissible, it was just gossip. And gossip doesn't make a judge pause mid-sentence and look up in disbelief. Evidence does. Cold, procedural, boring on-purpose evidence. So before I even considered submitting what I had, I needed to be absolutely certain it would hold. That meant going back to Owen, not for documents this time, but for interpretation. Precedent. Process. You want 19C to stick? He asked over a late-night call. Then you better know what qualifies as material financial interest under cross-jurisdictional influence. It's not just being married to her. You need to tie her money, your money, to his custody claim. I already had that. The transfers, the shell company, her digital signature on the formation papers. But I needed someone who'd done this dance in multiple courtrooms. So Owen pointed me to someone new. Angela Rowe. She wasn't a lawyer anymore. Gave that up after 3 years when she realized the courtroom was just theater and the real drama happened in the filing cabinets. She became a strategist, one of those shadow figures who get paid to make legal chaos look like symmetry. Corporations hired her to navigate regulatory warfare. I hired her for one task: make this path clean. Make it invisible until it detonates. Angela reviewed everything. Cross-referenced jurisdictional clauses. Checked dates, timestamps, filings, and notaries. Verified that the sealed custody ethics complaint was not only mentionable under 19C, but that my affidavit could be submitted under third-party indirect fiduciary concern, a phrase that sounds like gibberish until you realize it means, if your money touched it, you get to speak. Submit it sealed, she told me. Don't flag it. Don't notify counsel. Let the judge read it privately. Let it marinate. So I did. 2 days before the hearing, I walked into the courthouse, not the one for our divorce, the one 2 states away where Sean was trying to rewrite history, and handed a sealed envelope to the registrar with the exact clause printed on the front. Title V, Section 19C, Subclause B. It wasn't even addressed to Sean's lawyer. It was directed to Chambers. I left without fanfare. Meanwhile, she kept chirping. Brunch with friends. Wine nights with women she hadn't spoken to in years. Always the same smug grin on her face, like she was some heroine in a Lifetime movie about finally escaping the quiet, controlling husband for the passionate, free-spirited entrepreneur. My ex's firm is undefeated, she bragged at one gathering. They'll bury him. He's still clinging to the past, poor guy. The real joke? I wasn't using my firm. I wasn't even using a lawyer. I was using the one thing she and Sean never respected: structure. The fine print. The unglamorous little corners of the legal world where people like me thrive, and people like them get caught red-handed because they thought rules were suggestions. And just when I thought they might start to catch on, Sean threw one last Hail Mary. He filed a new petition, not to reopen custody of his own children. That ship had sailed. No, this one was worse. He filed for full custody of his current partner's child, her son, from a previous marriage. A child he wasn't biologically connected to, had no formal guardianship over, and had only known for a year. He framed it as an act of responsibility, claimed the biological father was absent, claimed the child saw him as a father figure, claimed that he was the one providing emotional and financial stability. That last one did it for me. Financial stability. My financial stability. My assets, my deferred comp, my house, all propping up this idiot's image like a fake wall in a stage play. And now, because of that, he was trying to take someone else's child from their father? It stopped being about revenge at that point. It became a matter of principle. I printed a final copy of my affidavit. 36 pages, not including the financial exhibits. Each exhibit labeled with origin, transfer date, attached signature. A full timeline of how funds had moved from me to her, from her to Sean, from Sean into the operating accounts of his retreat centers, which had then been listed in his petition as proof of active income generation. I had a friend notarize it, an old army buddy who now worked as a paralegal in town. He didn't ask questions, just looked at the last page, whistled, and said, "This gonna land on CNN or something?" "Hopefully not," I replied. I prefer silence. 2 days before the hearing, I submitted the full packet. No heads up, no letters to opposing counsel, just a sealed submission, formally acknowledged under Title V protocol and logged without red flags. It was buried in the docket like a time bomb, quiet, cold, legal. That same night, she called me. Didn't even bother with a hello. Just launched in, voice syrupy with smugness. "You do realize you're not going to win, right? My guy doesn't lose. His lawyer's a shark. My lawyer says you should just settle, get it over with." I took a long sip of my drink before answering. "Tell me," I said, "how many more courtrooms do you plan on smiling in?" She paused. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just wondering how many calendars you'll need to block off next month." She scoffed. "You sound unwell." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was working. Every gloating word, every performative post, every careless dollar she'd moved. It was all bricks in a wall she didn't even know she was building. And I just finished sealing the door shut. She still had a key, which irritated me more than I'd admit. After everything, the affair, the smug little power plays, the phone calls where she talked to me like I was a confused intern at her mercy, she still treated my house like a storage unit. She'd text me things like, "Coming by Friday. Need the good baking sheets and the mirror." No question mark. No please. Just an assumption that I'd comply, like the obedient ex she believed she'd crafted over 15 years of slow erosion. So when she came by that morning, wearing athleisure and sunglasses despite the overcast sky, I didn't say much. Just nodded when she brushed past me toward the guest room, where her remaining furniture sat like the remnants of someone else's life. She was on the phone, telling someone, probably her sister, how she had a massage at noon and a branding meeting for Sean's retreat startup at 3. That's what they were calling it now, a startup. Because putting yoga mats in a yurt is apparently innovation. "I'll be out all day," I told her, grabbing my jacket. "Important meeting." She waved me off like I was a leaf blowing past. "Whatever. Just don't be late signing over the car title next week. Sean wants to take it to Vermont." Yes, the car. The one I bought new. The one she now wanted to transfer to her spiritual sugar daddy because he needed a reliable vehicle for investor meetings. She'd already penciled in a notary appointment and sent me calendar invites, as if she was still my executive assistant and not the woman who detonated her life for a man with a podcast and a GoFundMe. "I'll be on time," I said. Wouldn't want to hold up the grand pilgrimage. I walked out before she noticed the envelope. It sat on the kitchen counter, partially tucked under a houseplant she'd never bothered to water. A standard manila folder. Her name printed neatly on a label. Beneath it, the case number for the upcoming custody hearing. I knew she'd see it. I knew exactly what she'd assume. That I was being dramatic. Petty. Trying to spook her by reminding her I knew what Sean was up to. Maybe she'd even smirk, think I was bluffing some empty threat to make her sweat. But what she didn't realize, what she couldn't realize, was that her name wasn't on that envelope just for flair. It was there because the court had already acknowledged her as a party of interest, not in our divorce, in his custody battle. When I submitted my affidavit under Clause 19C, I included every financial overlap I could document. But I also included the executive filing from Sean's new LLC, listing her as the communications officer, her digital signature at the bottom. I attached the bank statements showing her transfers, the wire with the memo, Sean's funding, the one where she laughed as she sent it, calling it a joint investment in their future. And because that LLC's listed address was mine, our former home, that made her not just a romantic partner. It made her a financial anchor. The court took notice, added her name. She didn't know yet, but she would. Because once you're listed as a party of interest in a custody case, you don't get to just sit in the courtroom smiling like arm candy. You're part of the inquiry, the questions, the evidence review. And if the judge is already familiar with the respondent, already skeptical because of past lies, then any misstep from a new financial partner starts to look like a continuation of a pattern. But that morning, she saw the envelope and did exactly what I knew she would. She opened it, read the first line, rolled her eyes, tossed it back on the counter, then took a selfie in the foyer mirror, captioned it, cleaning out the past nail polish medium light skin tone sparkles. I saw it later on her Instagram story. Her expression was smug, detached, almost pitying, like I was a leftover problem she'd finally outgrown. She still didn't understand. This wasn't a threat. This was a reservation. And she'd just confirmed attendance. That night, she texted me something glib. You're wasting your energy. Move on. Heal. I have. I didn't reply. Instead, I checked the court docket. Her name was still there. Case hashtag 2094, FC. Ashcroft versus Ashcroft, modification hearing. Line 12, supplemental party, non-marital financial contributor, her name. Line 13, required appearance confirmed. And just like that, she was no longer a spectator. She was part of the show. The best part? She had invited herself. The courthouse was cold in that artificial government way. Sterile lighting, linoleum floors polished within an inch of their lives, and chairs specifically designed to make you feel like a problem, not a participant. I arrived early. I always arrive early. Not because I'm anxious. Because I like watching people when they think no one's watching back. Neutral tie, navy suit, polished shoes, but not too polished. I looked like every other guy killing time before traffic court, not like someone who had spent the last 3 months quietly orchestrating a collapse. The clerk at the check-in desk barely glanced at me, asked if I was here for the 10:30 hearing. Family court, courtroom 2C. I nodded and said, just observing. She stamped something on a clipboard and waved me in. I took a seat in the back row, far left, the corner where the lighting didn't quite reach and the heating vent hummed just loud enough to cover a whisper. Perfect vantage point. 10 minutes later, they arrived. First came Sean, in a jacket 2 sizes too slim for his ego. He walked with that self-help swagger you see in crypto bros and failed TEDx speakers. Like posture alone could erase a history of perjury and unpaid invoices. His lawyer flanked him, young, sharp suit, overcompensating. Behind them, a smattering of family, an aunt, maybe a cousin, someone who looked like a spiritual consultant or just overdressed for court. They chatted quietly, nodded to the bailiff like this was routine. Then came Marissa. Sean's ex-wife didn't just walk in. She arrived. Her legal team filed in first, 2 senior partners, 1 junior associate carrying a rolling file case thick enough to kill a small deer. And behind them, stepping in like she hadn't a care in the world, was a man I recognized instantly from court transcripts, Judge Alan Brecker, family court senior circuit judge, and Marissa's cousin. He wasn't presiding, of course, that would have been a conflict, but he sat directly behind her, stone-faced, wearing his badge and his silence like a weapon. The room noticed. Even Sean's attorney blanched for a moment when he saw who was sitting 3 rows back from the petitioner's table. I could already feel it shifting. Not panic. Not yet. But the electricity of a room that realizes the narrative isn't what it thought it was. Then she arrived. My wife. Arm in arm with Sean, wearing a navy dress she used to reserve for gala fundraisers, one I'd bought her before our 10th anniversary. She smiled like someone about to accept an award. Walked in like this was their coronation, like they were here to display what healing looks like after breaking something you never understood. She didn't look at me. Didn't even scan the rows. In her mind, I wasn't part of this world anymore. I was the past, a pale specter she'd already deleted from her story. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Honorable Judge Harold Minters, the man who had presided over their previous battle. The one who'd stripped Sean of custody before, citing manipulation and deceit. Older now, slower, but his eyes, sharp as ever. He took the bench with practiced boredom, opened the case file, flipped a few pages. All right, he said. Petitioner Sean Ashcroft, requesting modification of custodial status, citing new domestic stability and financial independence. He trailed off. The room was silent. He squinted at the paper in front of him, adjusted his glasses. Read something again. Then he looked up, directly at me, and everything in the room went still. I felt her shift beside Sean. Her spine straightened, not because she saw me, because she sensed it, that infinitesimal change in atmosphere when someone realizes they're not in control of the narrative anymore. The judge cleared his throat. Is the party listed in the supplemental affidavit present today? His clerk leaned in, whispered something. The judge nodded slowly, still staring at me. Would the respondent's partner, Ms. her full name, please confirm your presence for the record? That got her. Her head snapped toward the bench, then back. And finally, her eyes landed on me. Back row, neutral tie, calm as a surgeon before the incision. She blinked once, confused. Then again. I didn't smile, didn't wave, just met her gaze like I was reading a report I already knew the ending to. Sean whispered something to her. She didn't respond, just stared. Judge Minters tapped the folder in front of him. We'll begin by reviewing the sealed submission provided 2 days ago. This court has determined it to be relevant under Section 19C. Sean's attorney stood abruptly. Your Honor, if we could request a brief recess too. You may sit down, the judge interrupted. He turned back to the file. And just like that, it began. Not with shouting, not with chaos, but with the rustle of papers. The kind that feel like thunder when you're the one who forged the signatures on them. Wait. The judge's voice wasn't loud, but the way it sliced through the room felt surgical. Like someone had pulled the emergency brake in the middle of a silent descent. He lowered his reading glasses, eyes narrowing. His tone dropped an octave. No longer judicial, just human. Everyone turned. All at once. My wife's head snapped toward the back row like she'd been slapped by the air itself. Sean's mouth opened slightly, mid-whisper, his lawyer frozen half out of his seat. Even Marissa's attorneys, who had seen plenty of drama in their day, sat up straighter. The silence was so absolute, you could hear the cheap courthouse clock ticking. I didn't move. I didn't nod. I didn't confirm anything. I just looked back at him. Judge Minters leaned forward. You filed this? He asked again, but softer now. There was something behind his tone this time. Not just curiosity. Recognition. I held his gaze for a second, then gave a single nod. It was enough. The clerk, already on edge, handed him the sealed file. A thick one. He opened it, flipping through the pages like he was reading a dossier on a man he'd once convicted, then forgotten, only to see his name again during parole review. The rustling of pages echoed in the chamber. Page after page of evidence. Spreadsheets. Transaction summaries. Bank transfers. Shell company registrations, property tax records, a chain of signatures and dates that looked too meticulous to be fabricated, because they weren't. They were real. They were mine. But more importantly, they were hers. And Sean's. Minter stopped halfway through and read something twice. Then again, a change swept across his face, not surprise this time, but something colder. Something reserved for liars who thought they were smarter than the bench. He glanced toward Sean, then toward my wife. You two may want to reconsider your posture before I read this aloud, he said dryly. Sean's lawyer shot to his feet. Your Honor, I must object too. Sit down, Minter said, not looking up. He continued reading. Allegations, yes. But more than that, patterns, dates, fund transfers, accounts in her name rerouted through the LLC Sean had used to prop up his image. The car title she demanded I sign over? In the file. The communications officer, document bearing her signature? Page 4. Her personal memo describing a $12,000 wire transfer to help Sean launch his spiritual enterprise. Annotated with bank routing info and time-stamped screenshots. She looked like she was shrinking in her chair. And the kicker? Page 37. My affidavit. Notarized. Dated. Sworn under penalty of perjury. With a full statement outlining the marital assets that were rerouted through our joint account into Sean's business, then claimed as income stability for the purposes of securing custody. The judge read it silently, then looked at her, then Sean, then back at me. I've seen some bold filings in my time, he said. But this one, he tapped the folder gently. This one actually has teeth. Marissa's attorney leaned in and whispered something to her, barely audible. We don't need to recess. We just need to watch. Sean's lawyer tried again. Your Honor, respectfully, we had no knowledge of. That's your problem, counselor, Minters snapped. You should have checked who was paying your client's bills, or at least who signed the checks for the LLC filings. He turned to my wife. You were aware your partner was under active ethics review at the time of these filings. She swallowed hard. No, I wasn't involved in any of. You signed 2 articles of incorporation. You're listed as an officer. You transferred funds through accounts still linked to your previous joint marital account. That makes you involved. Sean finally spoke, a hoarse whisper that barely cleared his throat. This was supposed to be sealed. It was sealed, the judge said, until someone with standing unsealed it. He looked at me one last time. And then, in front of everyone, he said, I know who you are now. You testified in that arbitration case 2 years ago, Tech versus LLC v. Dunsley State. You're the one who dismantled the entire licensing fraud in cross-examination. My wife's lips parted. I don't think she even breathed. Sean just blinked. The room wasn't silent anymore. It was stunned. Because it wasn't just that I had evidence. It was that I had history. And now the judge wasn't just reviewing some disgruntled ex's revenge play. He was reading the work of someone whose prior filings had ended entire ventures. You want full custody? Judge Minters asked, turning back to Sean. Then explain to me why you built your financial narrative on money that doesn't belong to you, funneled by a woman still in litigation, from an account held by the man who, let's be honest, could have buried you without this courtroom. He didn't answer. No one did. I didn't need to speak. The file spoke for me. And for once in her life, she couldn't talk her way out of it. Because my name didn't end with a threat. It ended with a fact. And now, that fact was on record. She stood up like she'd been yanked by puppet strings, sudden, stiff, and completely out of rhythm with the courtroom's pace. This has nothing to do with him, she snapped, her voice cutting through the still air like a fire alarm. The courtroom froze again, but not from surprise this time. From recognition. This wasn't indignation. It was panic. Judge Minters didn't flinch. He simply leaned back slightly in his chair, as though allowing her enough rope to hang herself. Ma'am, he said calmly, your name appears on 3 separate financial accounts used to support the petitioner's custody claim. Shall I read the amounts out loud for the record? Her eyes flicked sideways, toward Sean. And that's when it happened. The crack. The one thing she'd kept perfectly intact through all of this. The mask, the control, the poise, slipped. Just a little. But enough. Sean's head slowly turned toward her. For the first time in that courtroom, he wasn't performing. No smirk. No rehearsed lines. Just pure, slow comprehension. What did you do? He whispered. 3 seconds of silence. Then 4. She tried to form a sentence. Her mouth moved, but the words were sand. Dry, fragmented. She blinked at him as if expecting him to defend her, to lie for her. But Sean wasn't built for loyalty. He was built for leverage. And she had just become a liability. Ms., her last name, the judge continued. You wired a total of $41,300 over 5 months to accounts directly connected to the petitioner's LLC. You co-signed a lease for a property listed as a family residence in his application. You are currently listed as a financial officer on an organization presenting itself as fiscally independent from all prior associations. Do you understand what that means for the integrity of this petition? She opened her mouth again, closed it. This time, there was no script. Minters adjusted his posture. We'll take a 10-minute recess while I review the exhibits again. Counsel, remain available. He rose. Everyone stood. Marissa's attorney smiled. Not a gloat. Not a smirk. Just the subtle, knowing curl of someone who had just watched their opponent walk into their own bear trap. As the courtroom began to clear, my wife turned slowly. Her eyes scanned until they locked on me again. But it wasn't the same look as before. No confusion. No disdain. Just a kind of terrified understanding. She followed me. Of course she did. Into the hallway, away from the noise. I stopped near the wall, under a plaque listing donor names for some forgotten courthouse renovation. She stepped in front of me like she expected a private audience. What is this? She asked, breathless. Her hands trembled. Slightly. Not enough for a stranger to notice. But I knew those hands. I'd held them through surgeries, job interviews, family deaths. And I knew when they were lying. I said nothing. You can't just. This was supposed to be about us. About moving on. You blindsided me. With this? In his hearing? I tilted my head slightly. I told you. I said, voice even. I don't argue. Don't. She stopped herself. Don't pull that smug silence thing on me. That's what you always do. You act like you're above everything. No, I said. I just stopped wasting words on people who already made up their minds. She took a step back like I'd slapped her. I didn't move. She stared at me, mouth agape, waiting for some signal. A crack. A flinch. Anything to tell her this was a bluff. That she could still fix this. But there was nothing to fix. Because she wasn't in control anymore. She had handed that away, piece by piece, wire by wire, with every smug brunch quote and every dollar she pushed into Sean's facade. You brought me into his mess, I added, quiet now. Not the other way around. I didn't know. You didn't care. She went still. And for once, she didn't have a comeback. Just eyes searching for a version of me that would let her off the hook. But that man didn't exist anymore. Because she hadn't just picked the wrong man to betray. She'd picked the wrong man to underestimate. Inside the courtroom, the clock ticked closer to resumption. The hallway filled with whispers and movement. But out there, in that short, suspended moment, we stood in the exact center of what she had built. Not a marriage. Not a future. A house of cards. And the wind had arrived. The fallout didn't come with sirens or screaming. It came with quiet emails, unanswered texts, and calendar invites that suddenly vanished. It came with the way people started saying her name in lowered voices. The way her phone buzzed less and her inbox filled more, with reminders, missed calls, and questions she couldn't answer. By 8:42 the next morning, the custody motion was officially dismissed. The court order came through the system like a cold stamp on a warm body. Denied. Not delayed. Not tabled. Denied. On the grounds of newly uncovered material misrepresentation with suspected financial inducement from third-party contributors. That last line was like a bullet with her name carved along the casing. Visitation? Suspended pending review. Sean had been reformed, remember? Building stability, remember? Now he was being reviewed. Again, this time with more evidence, and a judge who no longer had patience for theatrics. She tried to get ahead of it. She made one call, to his lawyer. No one answered. She made another, to her law firm's partner. That one did answer, but not with sympathy. We'll need your immediate withdrawal from the Ashcroft case. It's a conflict. Internal review is already underway. She stammered something about loyalty, about how she wasn't even really involved, about how she'd only co-signed a few documents. But it didn't matter. The firm had its own name to protect, and she wasn't an asset anymore. She was a headline risk. An hour later, the HR director scheduled a compliance conversation. It was supposed to be Friday. Then it was moved to Wednesday. Then it was TBD. By noon, she sat in her office with a coffee she hadn't touched, staring at her screen like it was a foreign language. Her personal phone buzzed. A message from her mother. What did you do? Your uncle just called me. He said it's all over court records. Then another one. Are you going to jail? She didn't reply. The silence, now, was her only consistent companion. By 1 p.m., her divorce lawyer sent an email marked urgent. The subject line read, change in posture recommended, settlement pathway. Inside, just 2 lines. After reviewing the filings submitted in yesterday's hearing and considering the judge's preliminary language, I strongly advise reconsidering your previous refusal to settle. Your husband has demonstrated a level of preparation that complicates your position. Translation, you're not going to win this. Take the deal while there's still a deal. She didn't reply to that one either. Instead, she logged into the joint account. Or tried to. The password had changed. She clicked Forgot Password. It sent the reset link to a shared email. She clicked through, and then her stomach dropped. Balance, $0. The transaction history told the story plainly. The account had been legally frozen under the financial protection clause of the prenup, then quietly liquidated into the holding structure her husband had created 2 years ago. A clause she had signed, never read, during their second home purchase. Back when she still trusted him to handle the boring stuff. It had kicked in automatically the moment her name was listed as a party of interest in a financial ethics investigation. She opened her notes app, began typing a message to him, deleted it, typed again, deleted it. Instead, she just stared at the last transaction. Transfer to Capstone Advisory Holding Trust. Amount, all available funds. Memo, initiated per clause 6.2a, post-filing financial firewall. Timestamp, 7:04 a.m. Before her first coffee. Before her first excuse. Before she even opened her eyes, it was done. By 4 p.m., her boss stopped by her office. Didn't come in. Just leaned against the doorframe with a strange look on his face. Are the rumors true? She looked up, too slow. Which ones? He didn't answer. Just nodded, said, let me know if you need to step back for a while, and walked away. Her chair suddenly felt smaller. The air in the room heavier. It wasn't a collapse. It was erosion. Reputation, access, authority, dripping away in slow, silent droplets. Her name no longer opened doors. It opened inquiries. That night, she sat alone on her couch, phone dark, TV glowing faintly, watching a cooking show she wasn't really hearing. In front of her, a yellow legal pad. She'd written 3 names at the top. Her mother, her lawyer, him. Beneath it, nothing. Because the story she thought she was writing, the one where she left the boring man behind and reinvented herself with someone passionate, that story had reached the chapter where all the characters walked away from her, and none looked back. She nearly missed the knock. It was late afternoon, one of those gray, windless days where the light seems to avoid certain windows. She hadn't left the apartment in over 24 hours. Her phone had long since stopped buzzing. Her inbox was a graveyard of flagged messages and HR follow-ups she couldn't bring herself to open. The knock came again, 2 soft taps. Then silence. She opened the door expecting a neighbor. Instead, she found a courier holding a flat, rigid envelope with a red certified sticker. No logo. No sender name. Just her full name typed in sharp black font across the center. She signed without asking questions. She already knew. She sat at the dining table to open it, the same one they'd picked out together at a warehouse sale 6 years ago. The same table she'd once threatened to replace because it was too square, too cold. Now, she barely noticed the wood beneath her fingers. Inside, a letter. Just one sheet of high-weight paper. Her name at the top. No greeting. No punctuation except a period at the end of a single sentence. As of this date, you are no longer financially linked to any of my holdings. She stared at it for a moment. Long enough to feel her chest tighten. Not from heartbreak. From finality. The tone was brutal in its simplicity. Not angry. Not theatrical. Just absolute. Beneath the letter, stapled neatly, was the official court order from Sean's custody case. The one she hadn't even attended the end of. After the initial disaster in the courtroom, she hadn't gone back. Not when the court reopened investigation into his income claims. Not when his visitation was suspended. Not when her name appeared in legal summaries. She'd convinced herself it would all fade, get redacted, be quietly dropped. But it hadn't. The court had formally listed her as a third-party co-conspirator in undisclosed financial influence with potential material deception. She flipped to the next page. There it was. Black ink. Her name. Printed alongside his. She whispered it out loud, almost involuntarily. He didn't even raise his voice. No, he didn't. No angry texts. No midnight phone calls. No public posts. Just calm, methodical destruction. A chessboard flipped silently, one piece at a time, until she realized the king had been taken hours ago, and she'd just kept moving pawns around a dead battlefield. Her hand shook slightly, because now, the consequences weren't theoretical. The filing triggered an automatic separation of assets per the prenup's 3rd clause, a clause her lawyer had once waved off as a formality. She remembered that moment now, the way she rolled her eyes and signed without reading. How she joked about boring men needing boring protections. But he wasn't boring. He was prepared. The official filing triggered escrow account releases, insurance policy updates, company ownership consolidations. Even the apartment's lease, technically held in a trust, would now be reassessed for sole occupant status. And that trust? Filed under the same holding company she'd once tried to leverage in divorce negotiations, not realizing she'd never been listed on it in the first place. Everything she'd once mocked him for doing, his paperwork obsession, his neat filing systems, his boring weekends with financial reports, had become the weapon that dismantled her world. No confrontation, just precision. She glanced at the letter again. No signature, because he didn't need to sign it. The message wasn't about him. It was about her place in his world, and that place no longer existed. She stood up slowly, moved toward the window, and looked out at the street below. It was quiet, ordinary, nothing dramatic, just pedestrians, coffee cups, a kid on a bike weaving between parked cars. Life going on without her. She reached for her phone, opened her texts, scrolled past Sean's name, past her mother's, past the silence, stopped on his. She typed, "Can we talk?" Paused, then erased it. He had already spoken, with filings, with court records, with silence. Just like the judge had said, that moment in court when he looked up and saw him sitting in the back row. Wait, you're... The question that had changed the entire trajectory. Because now everyone did know who he was, what he'd done, and what she had lost. Not just a marriage, not just money, not just some false future she thought she could control, She'd lost the privilege of being underestimated. And once that's gone, there's no getting it back. Not with words, not with tears, and certainly not with noise. Because in the end, he never raised his voice. He just removed hers,